The tall glass building of Silverline Corporation stood proudly in the middle of the busy city. Its shining windows reflected the sun like a mirror. People who passed by always looked at it with respect. For them, it was a place where dreams were built, where success was written every single day. Inside that building, the most powerful man was Mr. Richard, the CEO. He was known for his sharp suits, his perfect hair, and his strong voice that filled every meeting room. But Richard was also known for something else: his pride. He believed he was smarter than everyone, richer than anyone, and more important than all the people working under him. He often said, "I made this company. Without me, no one here would survive." His managers would nod quickly, afraid to disagree. Some admired him, but most of them respected him out of fear, not love. Every morning, Richard walked into the office with his shiny shoes clicking on the floor. Employees stood straight when he passed by. They whispered greetings, but he never replied. For him, they were just workers, not people worth his attention. On the other side of this world of glass and pride was Samuel. He was the janitor of the building. His job was simple: cleaning floors, emptying trash, and keeping everything neat. Samuel was quiet, humble, and always smiling, even though life had not been kind to him. He was in his late 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. His uniform was plain, his hands were rough, but his heart was gentle. Every day, Samuel arrived before the sun rose and left after the moon appeared. He never complained, never argued, and never showed anger, even when people ignored him. He greeted everyone with respect, even those who didn't bother to notice him. But Richard noticed him not in a good way. One morning, Richard walked into the lobby. He saw Samuel cleaning the marble floor. The janitor had placed a yellow sign, "Caution, wet floor." But Richard didn't care. He walked right across the wet area. His shoe slipped slightly, and he frowned. "Who told you to mop the floor right now?" Richard's voice was cold. Samuel looked up politely. "Sir, I clean early so the floor is fresh before the employees come. I'm almost done." Richard shook his head. "Excuses. You people always have excuses. Next time, wait until I'm in my office before doing this nonsense." Samuel quietly nodded. "Yes, sir." The lobby guard, who saw this, felt uncomfortable. Samuel had not done anything wrong, but no one dared to correct the CEO. Over the weeks, Richard grew more annoyed with Samuel. He didn't like the way the janitor quietly went about his work, as if nothing bothered him. He didn't like how Samuel smiled kindly at everyone, even when they ignored him. Somehow, Richard felt that this humble janitor was standing taller than him in ways he could not explain. One Friday evening, as Richard prepared to leave for the weekend, he saw Samuel cleaning near his private office. Richard frowned. "Why are you always around here? Don't you have other floors to clean?" Samuel replied gently, "Sir, I clean every floor. Yours is just one of them." Richard smirked. "Well, I don't like being watched while I work. Starting Monday, I don't want to see you here. Go clean somewhere else, or better yet, go home for good. You're fired." The words fell heavy in the air. Samuel stood still, holding his mop. His eyes were calm, not angry, not broken. He simply nodded. "As you wish, sir." Richard grabbed his coat and walked out, feeling powerful. To him, it was nothing. Just another worker gone. Janitors were easy to replace. But what Richard did not know was that Samuel was not just a janitor. Behind his simple uniform and gentle smile was a man with a plan bigger than anyone could imagine. For years, Samuel had been quietly watching, learning, and building something of his own. Something that could change the future of the entire company. Something worth $50 billion. And now, with his job taken away so easily, Samuel knew it was time to bring that plan forward. The weekend was about to change everything. The weekend felt quiet for Richard. He spent his time in his luxury penthouse, drinking coffee while watching the city lights from his balcony. For him, firing the janitor was already forgotten. In his mind, Samuel was just another unimportant worker. But on the other side of town, Samuel sat in a small, simple apartment. His furniture was old, his walls were plain, but his desk was full of papers, notebooks, and a laptop that carried years of work. Samuel wasn't just a janitor. He was a man with vision. Long ago, before life became difficult, Samuel had studied business and engineering. He once had dreams to start his own company, but hardships had forced him into small jobs just to survive. The janitor's uniform might have hidden his dreams, but it never erased them. For years, while others ignored him, Samuel quietly observed the world around him. Every evening, after cleaning the tall glass building, he wrote down ideas. He watched how companies rose and fell. He noticed mistakes people made in management. He studied market changes, technology, and the way people's needs were growing. Slowly, Samuel built a plan. Not just a small idea, but something huge. Something worth billions. His plan could revolutionize the market and create a new future for industries. He didn't tell anyone. He simply worked in silence. Now, with Richard's arrogant decision, Samuel knew his time had come. He no longer had to stay in the background. Losing his janitor job felt like losing little, but it also meant he was free to step forward. On Monday morning, Silverline Corporation's employees returned to work. They noticed that Samuel was gone. The lobby looked clean, but without Samuel's quiet presence, something felt missing. The receptionist whispered, "Did you hear? Mr. Richard fired Samuel." Some shook their heads. Why? He never troubled anyone. But no one dared to speak loudly. In that building, Richard's word was final. Richard himself walked into the building as usual, his chin high. His managers followed him into the meeting room. "This week," he said, "we focus on expansion. I want profits up by 10%. They all nodded, writing notes quickly. But while Richard spoke about profits, in another part of the city, Samuel was meeting an old friend, Daniel, a retired banker. Daniel was one of the few who knew Samuel's real talents. "You're finally ready?" Daniel asked as they sat in a quiet cafe. Samuel smiled gently. "Yes. I have everything prepared. The designs, the numbers, the vision. It's time." Daniel nodded. "I always told you, Samuel, you're more than a janitor. This plan of yours, it's not just big, it's history making." They talked for hours. Samuel explained how his project would create jobs, reduce costs, and change the way companies worked worldwide. Daniel listened with shining eyes. "You'll need investors, but once they see this, they won't hesitate. Do you realize, Samuel, this is worth at least $50 billion?" Samuel nodded humbly. "It's not about the number. It's about creating something that lasts. Something that helps people." Daniel leaned forward. "And Silverline? Will you include them?" Samuel paused. He thought of Richard's harsh words, the cold look in his eyes. Then he said softly, maybe. But not in the way he expects. Back at Silverline, Richard felt proud of himself. He thought everything was under control. But strange things began to happen. First, one of the company's biggest clients cancelled a contract, choosing a new partnership instead. Then, some of Richard's managers started receiving emails from investors asking about a new competitor in the market. Competitor? Richard frowned when he heard this. Who dares compete with me? The managers shifted nervously. We don't know yet, sir. But people are talking about a powerful new idea. Something innovative. Richard laughed. Nonsense. No one can compete with Silverline. But deep inside, a small seed of worry began to grow. Meanwhile, Samuel continued working quietly but strongly. His plan moved forward quickly. Daniel introduced him to partners who respected his vision. They didn't care that Samuel once wore a janitor's uniform. They saw his intelligence, his honesty, and his unique ideas. In just a few weeks, Samuel's project began gaining attention from powerful circles. Newspapers started writing small articles about a mystery entrepreneur with a billion-dollar plan. People were curious. Who was this man? But Samuel stayed quiet. He didn't reveal himself yet. One evening, Samuel walked past the Silverline building. He stood across the street, looking at the tall glass windows. Inside, lights shone from Richard's office on the top floor. Samuel whispered to himself, "You fired me because you thought I was nothing. But soon, you'll see." The wind blew softly, carrying his words into the night. The story of Samuel's rise was only beginning. Richard still sat on his golden chair, proud and blind, unaware that the man he had dismissed without respect was holding a plan that could shake the very foundation of Silverline Corporation. The game between arrogance and humility had started. And the world would soon witness how the janitor everyone ignored would stand taller than the CEO everyone feared. The city's business world was always full of noise, meetings, deals, and numbers flying like birds in the air. Yet in the middle of all this, a new whisper began spreading. A whisper about a mysterious project, a vision that could change everything. The newspapers called it the $50 billion idea. No one knew exactly who was behind it, but every article hinted at its promise. Some said it would create a new industry. Others said it would save companies billions each year. Everyone agreed on one thing: it was powerful. At Silverline Corporation, the managers could no longer ignore the rumors. In the boardroom, one manager cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, have you seen today's paper?" Richard, sitting at the head of the long polished table, looked up with sharp eyes. "What paper?" The manager slid the newspaper forward. The headline read, "The Future of Business, $50 billion Plan in the Making." Richard frowned. Another journalist trying to make noise. "Don't waste my time." "But sir," the manager continued carefully, "investors are asking questions. They want to know if Silverline is prepared for this." Richard slammed his hand lightly on the table. "Prepared? We are the leaders. There is nothing to fear." His voice was full of confidence, but inside, a small doubt started forming. Meanwhile, Samuel was not reading headlines for pride. He was working. Day and night, he poured his energy into shaping his project. His small apartment had turned into a command center, papers neatly stacked, charts pinned on the wall, and his laptop filled with plans. Daniel often visited him, bringing coffee and encouragement. "You know," Daniel said one evening, "the world is starting to notice." Investors are calling me every hour. They want to meet you. Samuel smiled softly. Let them wait. It's not time yet. The idea must be strong before it goes public. I don't want to rush. Daniel nodded. He admired Samuel's patience. Most people chased fame quickly, but Samuel wanted to build something lasting. Back at Silverline, Richard's week grew heavier. Another client left. Investors called him directly, asking about the mysterious competitor. In meetings, his managers looked nervous, their pens shaking as they wrote notes. Why is everyone so afraid of shadows? Richard shouted one morning. This so-called billion-dollar idea is probably just talk. We are Silverline. No one can replace us. But his words no longer carried the same weight. His managers exchanged worried looks. They could see what Richard refused to see: the world was changing. One afternoon, while walking into the lobby, Richard noticed the floor shining as usual. But something was missing: Samuel's quiet presence. The new janitor worked quickly, but without Samuel's calm smile, the lobby felt colder. Richard didn't admit it, but something inside him felt strange. For years, Samuel had been there silently, and now the absence echoed louder than expected. Why am I even thinking about that janitor? Richard muttered to himself. He was nobody. But destiny had other plans. Samuel's idea began to attract not only investors but also young minds. A group of talented engineers joined him, inspired by his vision. They believed in his honesty, his intelligence, and his quiet strength. Working together, they built models, software, and designs that turned Samuel's dream into reality. Every day, Samuel guided them not as a boss, but as a mentor. He listened, encouraged, and respected their ideas. Unlike Richard, who demanded respect, Samuel earned it naturally. One evening, one of the engineers asked him, "Sir, why didn't you share this plan earlier? You could have been a billionaire years ago." Samuel smiled. Sometimes, life asks us to wait. I had to learn patience, humility, and strength. Money without wisdom is nothing. Now, it is the right time. The city began buzzing with more excitement. TV channels discussed the project. Talk shows invited experts to guess who the mystery founder was. Some thought it must be a famous businessman. Others believed it was a hidden genius from abroad. No one guessed it was the quiet janitor who once mopped the floors of Silverline. Richard, however, could not escape the growing storm. At a dinner with other CEOs, one leaned over and asked, "Richard, what do you think of this new $50 billion project? Will Silverline survive?" Richard forced a smile. "Of course. We are leaders. No rumor can touch us." But when he went home that night, his chest felt heavy. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at himself. For the first time, he wondered if his arrogance had blinded him. On the other side of the city, Samuel closed his laptop after finishing another long day of work. He stepped to the window of his small apartment and looked at the stars. His eyes were calm, but his heart carried a quiet fire. "You fired me, Richard," he whispered. "You thought I was invisible. But soon, you will see me. Not as a janitor, but as the man who will change everything." The wind outside carried his words softly, as if the universe itself was listening. The whispers in the market were now louder. Silverline's walls, once strong and shiny, had begun to crack. Richard tried to ignore it, but destiny was already moving pieces on the board. The janitor's time was coming. and the arrogant CEO's greatest lesson was about to begin. The city had never been this curious before. Business circles were alive with one question: who was behind the $50 billion plan? The newspapers gave hints, the television programs debated, and investors whispered in every meeting. People spoke about it in cafes, offices, and even on buses. Everyone wanted to know the name. At Silverline Corporation, the pressure was heavier than ever. Richard walked into the boardroom with his usual confidence, but his managers could read the tension on his face. One manager cleared his throat. "Sir, the investors are demanding answers. They are asking if Silverline is preparing to compete with this new project. Some are even considering moving their money elsewhere." Richard forced a laugh. "They are fools. Do they really believe in some unknown dreamer? We are Silverline, the strongest in the market. We don't lose to shadows." But deep inside, Richard felt unsettled. His empire had never faced such invisible competition before. Meanwhile, in his small apartment, Samuel sat surrounded by his growing team. Engineers, analysts, and young dreamers filled the room with energy. Laptops glowed, charts covered the walls, and ideas flowed like rivers. Samuel listened quietly, guiding them with calm wisdom. He never raised his voice, never demanded respect. Instead, he encouraged them to think, to create, and to believe. "Remember," Samuel told them gently, "we are not building this for money alone. We are building it for people, for workers, for families, for future generations. If we succeed, it will not only bring profit but also hope." The team admired him deeply. To them, he was not just a leader but a mentor who inspired trust. Daniel, his old friend, entered the room holding a newspaper. "Samuel," he said with a smile, "they are calling you the mystery giant. Every article wonders who you are. Investors are begging me for meetings. It's time to show them your face." Samuel paused. He looked at the team and then at the papers on his desk. For years, he had lived in the shadows, unseen and ignored. Now the world was asking for him. "Yes," he said finally. "It is time." The first reveal was small but powerful. A respected financial magazine published an article. The headline read, "The man behind the $50 billion vision." Inside, for the first time, Samuel's picture appeared. He was not in a suit, not in luxury clothes. He wore a simple shirt, standing with a calm smile. The article told his story: how he had once worked as a janitor, how he studied quietly in the shadows, how he built a plan that could change the world. The city was shocked. A janitor? People could hardly believe it. Social media exploded with his story. Some laughed in disbelief, but most felt inspired. If a janitor can dream this big, many said, then anyone can. Silverline's employees read the article with wide eyes. Whispers spread in the hallways, "That's Samuel, the janitor we saw every day." Some smiled with pride, others shook their heads in regret for ignoring him. When Richard saw the magazine, his face turned pale. He stared at Samuel's picture for a long time. The man he had fired without a second thought was now the most talked about name in the business world. This can't be true," Richard muttered. "A janitor? Leading a $50 billion plan? Impossible." But the truth was printed on every page. That week, investors began pulling away from Silverline. They wanted to meet Samuel instead. They wanted to hear about his plan, his vision, his future. Silverline's stock began to shake, while Samuel's name rose like the morning sun. In his office, Richard sat alone, staring out the tall glass window. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. His pride, his arrogance, his certainty all seemed to slip away like sand through his fingers. He whispered to himself, "How could I not see it? He was right here, under my nose." Meanwhile, Samuel remained calm. Fame did not change him. He still woke up early, still drank tea in his small kitchen, and still greeted his neighbors politely. But now, people looked at him with respect. One evening, when he walked down the street, a young man stopped him. "Sir, I read your story. I want to work hard like you. You showed me that no job is small, and no dream is too big." Samuel smiled kindly and patted his shoulder. "Work with honesty. Be patient. Success will come when the time is right." Back in the shining glass building, Richard faced his managers in silence. The boardroom that once echoed with his loud voice now felt heavy. One manager finally said, "Sir, maybe we should consider partnering with Samuel. His project is too strong to fight." Richard's eyes darkened. Partner with the man he fired? Partner with the janitor he had mocked? His pride burned inside him. But even he could see the truth. Silverline was in danger, and Samuel now held the key. For the first time in his life, Richard faced a choice he never imagined. Would he swallow his pride and reach out to the man he once called nothing? The answer to that question would decide the future of both men. Richard sat in his tall office, staring at the glowing skyline of the city. The glass windows reflected his face, but he hardly recognized himself anymore. The proud, confident CEO who once believed nothing could touch him now looked tired, uncertain, and restless. His phone buzzed again. Another investor. Another question. Another doubt. "Mr. Richard," the voice on the phone said politely, "we are considering moving our funds. Samuel's project looks promising. If Silverline doesn't adjust soon, you may lose more investors." Richard clenched his jaw. "You think I will beg a janitor to save my company?" The voice on the phone grew firm. "He is no longer a janitor, sir. He is the future." The call ended, leaving Richard in silence. Meanwhile, Samuel's life had changed completely. His project, once hidden in a small apartment, now had a proper office. It wasn't a shiny tower like Silverline, but it was full of energy, ideas, and hope. Young engineers worked late into the night, investors visited every day, and Samuel guided everyone with his quiet strength. Yet, despite the growing fame, Samuel stayed the same. He still wore simple clothes, still spoke gently, and still treated everyone with respect. One afternoon, Daniel entered the office carrying a folder. "Samuel," he said with excitement, "congratulations. The project has officially reached international investors. You are not only the talk of the city, you are the talk of the world." The team cheered. Some clapped, others hugged each other in joy. Samuel raised his hand softly. "Friends, this is good news, but let us stay focused. We are building something bigger than fame. Let us not forget why we started." The room fell quiet. Everyone nodded. They knew Samuel's heart was not chasing money or headlines, he was chasing a vision that could change lives. Back at Silverline, the storm grew darker. Clients were leaving faster. Investors were restless. Employees were whispering in hallways. For the first time, the great Silverline Corporation looked weak. In a private meeting, Richard's closest manager spoke carefully. "Sir, we have to face reality. Samuel's plan is strong. If we fight him, we will lose. But if we join him, maybe we can survive. Richard stood tall, his pride heavy in his chest. You want me to partner with a man I fired? A man who used to mop our floors. The manager lowered his eyes. Sir, it is not about who he was. It is about who he is now. Richard turned away, unwilling to accept the truth. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He walked around his penthouse, thinking of the day he had fired Samuel. The memory replayed again and again. Samuel's calm face, his quiet "as you wish, sir," haunted him. How did I not see it? Richard whispered to himself. He was there every day, and I treated him like he was nothing. For the first time, guilt touched his heart. But pride still fought inside him. Reaching out to Samuel meant admitting he was wrong. And Richard had never admitted defeat in his life. The next morning, newspapers carried another headline: Samuel's project valued at $50 billion, Silverline falling behind. When Richard walked into the office, employees avoided his eyes. They whispered behind his back, not with respect, but with doubt. He felt the ground slipping beneath him. In the boardroom, one director finally spoke openly. Richard, we cannot ignore this any longer. We must request a meeting with Samuel. Richard's face burned. No, I will not bow to him. The director's voice was calm but firm. Then Silverline will fall. Pride will not pay the bills, sir. We need action. The words hit Richard hard. For the first time, someone had spoken to him without fear. While Richard wrestled with pride, Samuel continued to rise with humility. He was invited to speak at a business conference. The hall was full of leaders, journalists, and students. Cameras flashed as Samuel walked to the stage in his simple shirt. He spoke gently, but every word touched hearts. I once worked as a janitor, he said. People did not see me. But every job, no matter how small, has value. I dreamed, I worked, I waited. And today, I stand before you not because I am special, but because I never gave up. Remember this: your position does not define your future. Your vision does. The hall erupted with applause. Some stood with tears in their eyes. His story was no longer just about business, it was about hope. The next day, newspapers didn't just talk about Samuel's project. They talked about his character, his humility, and his strength. He had become more than a businessman, he had become an inspiration. Richard read the article alone in his office. The words felt like arrows piercing his pride. The man he once dismissed as unimportant was now admired by the world. For the first time in his life, Richard asked himself a painful question: is my pride worth losing everything? The answer was not clear yet, but one thing was certain: he could no longer ignore Samuel. The janitor he fired was now the man who could decide Silverline's future. Richard had never felt so heavy in his life. The tall glass walls of Silverline, which once gave him pride, now felt like cages closing in on him. Every day brought more bad news. Clients were leaving, investors were silent, and employees no longer looked at him with respect. One evening, Richard sat alone in his office. His managers had all gone home, but he stayed, staring at the city lights. He whispered to himself, I built this empire. How can it all slip away because of one man? But deep inside, he knew it was not just one man. It was his own pride. The memory of Samuel's calm eyes, the simple nod when he was fired, returned again and again. Richard sighed and lowered his head. For the first time, he admitted to himself, I was wrong. The next morning, after a night without sleep, Richard called his assistant. Arrange a meeting, he said. The assistant looked surprised. With whom, sir? Richard hesitated. The words felt heavy in his throat. With Samuel. The assistant almost dropped her pen. She quickly nodded. Yes, sir. I'll make the call. That afternoon, in a quiet cafe far away from the noise of skyscrapers, Samuel sat at a small wooden table. He wore his usual plain shirt, sipping tea with calmness. He knew this meeting would come sooner or later. The door opened, and Richard walked in. For the first time, he wasn't wearing his proud expression. His suit was still sharp, but his face looked tired, his steps heavy. When their eyes met, Samuel smiled politely. Please, sit. Richard sat across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. Samuel. He stopped. The word sorry felt like a mountain he could not climb. Samuel waited patiently, his eyes gentle. Richard tried again. I didn't see you. I didn't see who you really were. I was blinded by myself. His voice was low, softer than ever before. Samuel nodded slowly. I was never angry with you, Richard. You treated me as many others did. But life is not about how people treat us. It's about what we choose to do despite it. Richard looked down. His hands trembled slightly. Silverline is falling. Investors are leaving. The truth is, I need you. The words tasted bitter, but they were honest. Samuel sipped his tea calmly. Do you need me, Richard, or do you need my plan? The question hit Richard deeply. He had always valued results, not people. Now, for the first time, he was forced to look beyond numbers. I need, Richard paused. He looked into Samuel's steady eyes. I need both. But more than that, I think I need to learn what I failed to see. I want to change, Samuel. I don't know how yet, but I want to. Samuel studied him quietly. He could see the cracks in Richard's pride, the struggle of a man learning humility for the first time. Change, Samuel said softly, is not in words, Richard. It is in actions. Are you ready to act differently? Richard nodded slowly. Yes. Teach me. The cafe grew quiet. Outside, cars passed by, and the world moved on. But inside, something powerful was happening. Two men, once divided by arrogance and humility, sat at the same table, facing truth. After a long silence, Samuel finally said, I will not fight against Silverline. But I also will not let pride destroy what I have built. If you are willing to work with me with honesty, respect, and humility, then there is a chance for both of us. Richard swallowed hard. I am willing. For the first time, he meant it. News of the meeting spread quickly. People were shocked to hear that the mighty CEO and the humble visionary had sat together. Some expected a rivalry, but instead, there was a whisper of partnership. At Silverline, employees felt hope again. Perhaps change was coming. At Samuel's office, the young engineers were proud. Our leader is teaching even the strongest men lessons, they said. Later that night, Samuel stood by his window, looking at the stars. Daniel was with him. You gave him a chance, Daniel said softly. Samuel nodded. Everyone deserves a chance to change. Even those who once hurt us. Pride is a heavy chain, Daniel. If he is willing to break it, then maybe together we can build something greater. Daniel smiled. The world is watching you both. This is no longer just business, it is a story of humility and pride, of fall and rise. Samuel's eyes remained calm, shining with quiet wisdom. Then let us write this story well. In another part of the city, Richard sat alone in his penthouse, replaying the meeting in his mind. For the first time, he felt lighter, not because his problems were gone, but because he had finally taken the first step away from his arrogance. He whispered to himself, "Thank you, Samuel." It was the beginning of an unexpected partnership. One built not on fear or pride, but on lessons learned the hard way. The janitor who was once unseen had become a teacher. And the CEO who once ruled with arrogance was finally ready to listen. The world didn't know it yet, but history was about to be made. The news of Samuel and Richard's meeting spread across the city like wildfire. At first, people doubted it. How could the arrogant CEO, who once fired a humble janitor, now sit at the same table with him? But soon, the truth became clear: Silverline and Samuel's project were moving toward a partnership. It was not easy. Some investors worried. Some employees whispered. But slowly, the idea of two very different men working together began to capture everyone's imagination. In the first joint press conference, reporters filled the hall. Cameras flashed, microphones stretched forward, and questions flew like arrows. Richard wore his usual suit, but his voice was softer, more humble. Samuel stood beside him in his simple shirt, calm as always. Richard spoke first. "For years, I believed success was only about power and pride. I was wrong. True success is about vision, respect, and humility. Today, I stand beside a man I once ignored, a man who taught me that greatness can come from anywhere." The room went silent. People stared in surprise. No one had ever heard Richard speak this way. Then Samuel spoke. "This is not about me or Silverline alone. This is about what we can build together. A future where no dream is too small, and no person is invisible. We are here to show that when humility and strength walk side by side, nothing is impossible." The hall erupted in applause. Reporters clapped, some even stood on their feet. The story of a janitor and a CEO now stood as a symbol of hope for everyone. Behind the cameras, the real work began. Samuel's team and Silverline's managers sat together, planning carefully. The atmosphere was different from before. There was no arrogance, no fear. Ideas flowed freely, and everyone's voice mattered. Samuel guided the discussions with calm wisdom. Richard, once quick to command, now listened more than he spoke. He asked questions, admitted when he didn't know, and encouraged others to share. It was a change no one had ever expected, but it was real. Employees at Silverline began to notice the difference. Meetings were more open, decisions were more balanced, and even the office atmosphere felt lighter. People no longer walked in fear, they walked with purpose. Months passed. The partnership bloomed into something greater than anyone imagined. Samuel's vision combined with Silverline's resources created a powerful force. Together, they launched a groundbreaking system that transformed industries. Costs went down, opportunities went up, and jobs multiplied across the city. The newspapers no longer spoke of rivalry. Instead, they spoke of transformation. Headlines read, "From Janitor to Visionary, How Humility Changed a CEO and Built a Future." People from all walks of life felt inspired. Workers believed in their own dreams. Students studied harder. Even business leaders learned to treat their employees with more respect. Samuel's story had become more than business, it had become a lesson. One evening, Samuel visited the Silverline building. The same tall glass tower where he once mopped floors now welcomed him as a partner. As he entered the lobby, employees greeted him warmly. Some even whispered proudly, "That's Samuel. He used to work here, and now he's leading the future." Samuel smiled gently, his heart full of gratitude. He walked past the shiny floor, remembering the day Richard had fired him. That painful moment had led to this new chapter. Upstairs, Richard waited in his office. When Samuel entered, Richard stood, not with arrogance but with respect. "Samuel," Richard said softly, "you changed me. You changed this company. I don't know how to thank you." Samuel smiled. "By continuing to change, Richard. By remembering that leadership is not about being above others, but about walking with them." Richard nodded, his eyes heavy with emotion. For the first time in his life, he felt free from the chains of pride. Years later, people still spoke about them. Universities taught their story as an example of humility and leadership. Business schools studied how a janitor's vision reshaped the market. Young people repeated Samuel's words, "Your position does not define your future. Your vision does." Silverline was no longer just a corporation. It had become a symbol of change, proof that respect and humility could create stronger foundations than pride and fear. One afternoon, Samuel sat in his simple home, sipping tea as always. Daniel visited, carrying a book that had just been published. The title read, "The Janitor's Dream, A Story of Vision and Humility." Daniel placed it on the table with a smile. "Your story, Samuel. The world will read it for generations." Samuel picked up the book, his eyes calm. "It was never just my story, Daniel. It was ours. It was about every person who was ever unseen, every dream that was ever ignored, and every leader who had the courage to change." Outside the window, children played, their laughter filling the air. Samuel smiled as he watched them. The world was brighter now, not because of billions, but because of lessons learned and hearts changed. In the end, the arrogant CEO was no longer arrogant, and the humble janitor was no longer unseen. Together, they built not just a partnership, but a legacy. A legacy that reminded the world, pride can build towers, but only humility can make them last.